All right, Latasha, we want to start with you. You were there in the room at the rally tonight. I watched at home. It seemed like a raucous, electric crowd. What can you tell us, having been in the room?
You know, Simone, it was actually electrifying. I have been to many rallies in my life, political rallies, and it was absolutely electrifying. You know, what was really interesting is the number of young people that were in the room. I think it's really clear that this campaign is going to focus on young voters and re-engaging young voters in this election cycle. I knew it was a room full of young people when they knew all of the words to Drake's song. I mean, to Kendrick Lamar's song, "They're Not Like Us." It was really interesting. The energy was high. People were excited. People left ignited. I talked to some young people that were there. One young woman I talked to goes to Tennessee State University, that she drove in, that she had planned to vote this election cycle, but now she was going to actually organize a busload of her peers to actually go to the polls. So that's the kind of excitement from beginning to end that happened tonight in Atlanta.
Latasha, I'm wondering, what was the response when the rally was over? Obviously, you heard from Quavo, you heard from Meg Thee Stallion, and then the vice president herself, specifically taking it directly to Donald Trump on everything from immigration to his unwillingness at this point to debate her. What was the tone and tenor, if you will, in the conversation after the rally?
You know, I think that it was interesting. People seemed like they didn't want to leave. They want to actually see this debate. They want to see him debate her. You know, I felt that they were excited about her campaign and her candidacy, but they really felt like there was a pathway to victory. People that we talked to all across outside, they were just lingering around saying, yes, we can do this. I kept hearing people say, we're going to win, we can do this. So there was a lot of hope on this piece. And then I heard people talk about, yeah, he needs to debate her. What is he running? Is he scared? And so it was really interesting to hear. I think that what we heard, a couple of things. One, I thought we heard about the direction of the campaign. It seemed like the tone was around young people. We also heard she went straight in on immigration and really let me set this record straight around what we have done with immigration and how the Republicans have actually blocked that. She went straight in on talking about reproductive justice and women, and out of all of the issues that were raised reproductive justice, the crowd, that was the loudest applause multiple times tonight. So I think that they've got a clear pathway of making sure that people know who she is, know about this campaign, and young people and people who said that they weren't energized that I spoke with tonight are now in fact energized.
About 10,000 people, at least, were said to be at that rally. Eugene, this was in Georgia.
Yeah.
Georgia used to be reliably Republican. I remember for years when I was a Democratic strategist in my former life, folks used to talk about turning Georgia blue. And then in 2020, it did turn blue. Joe Biden won in 2020. What are you hearing from Democrats about Georgia this time around?
Yeah, well, like a month ago, Democrats and even folks on the Biden campaign, what used to be the Biden campaign, were saying Georgia was going to be back to red. They were not feeling confident that they were going to be able to hold this on, right? You had Warnock and Ossoff at one point that helped in 2020. Warnock kept running over and over again. And so, you know, the idea of it as a swing state still hasn't been proven. One presidential election does not make a swing state. But they are feeling different now with Harris at the top. That 10,000 person rally, you know, what Latasha's talking about the way, the energy that's in those rooms. We were at the Milwaukee event last week, and it feels like an entirely different campaign. The excitement that's within the party right now, you know, we called it a sugar high, in a possible sugar high in playbook this week, but it seems like they might be able to sustain it. In Georgia, it's going to be tough, right? All of these states that are swing states are going to be tight, and they're going to have to run up the margins on young voters, black voters, and brown voters, right? They have to figure out how to do that, but they feel much better about Georgia than they did even actually a week ago.
Even a week ago. Oh, how much things have changed. You know, the backdrop of this entire conversation is, in fact, also the running mate search. Eugene, there's new reporting from Politico tonight that you have learned some things. What have you learned? When are we going to have a decision?
Yeah. First, we found out that she was going to be in Philly on Tuesday, and that she was going to be with her running mate. So that was going to be kind of like the first rally that they were going to have. And then they're going on a tour. They're going on a tour of a bunch of different swing states. They're going to Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada. They're going back to Georgia. And what we know is that the decision is going to have to happen before Tuesday. It sounds like as early as Monday, right? They're kind of playing with us. She's doing, as we're told, interviews this week. So far, it's mostly been staff. She has started to have to sit down with these men, because that's who we're talking about here, about who is going to be the person. And what I've been told, and I think what we all have been told, is that she wants a governing partner. You know what I mean? They don't seem to feel like she, with all the energy we just saw, that they need someone to kind of re-energize the party, right? It's 98 days. I think people are thinking about her, and that she's looking for someone to do what she did for Joe Biden, or what she feels like she did for Joe Biden, which is figure out how to help him govern in January. And that's kind of where we are. Who it's going to be, I think their mom. I will say I was warned many times by the campaign that just because Philly is the first rally with her and whoever this running mate is, to not read into that doesn't mean that it's going to be Josh Shapiro, but they always say that. So again,
Jasmine, you just never know. I mean, there are a lot of things about this process that are normal, right? It is actually customary and normal to plan out something or some things for the candidate and their potential running mate to do even before the campaign knows who that running mate is. But this is also a very truncated process. There was not 2 months worth of vetting, just going through the papers, and then months and months of checking what people put forward. What is your reporting telling you about how the campaign is trying to make this as normal as possible? I'm also struck by the fact that that the vice president herself is going to do interviews. That doesn't always happen. In 2020, Joe Biden only interviewed Gretchen Whitmer. Yeah.
Right. It doesn't always happen. And more importantly, I think, is that the process that the vice president is going through right now is so different than the process that she went in 2020, not just because of the time constraint, but because there are arguably less people involved in the process, and because they have to do it in a way where maybe they're going to be taking a chance because they can't vet all the way, because there's potentially not enough time. Now, I think that we may be seeing that kind of play out on the Republican side. I think Democrats are hoping it doesn't play out the same on their side, but the process is much different. Still, though, I think Eugene is right that in some ways it looks the same. I know a story I did last week that Harris was telling her advisors that she wants somebody to balance the ticket, and it's not just electorally, but it is governing, and that she wants somebody who potentially would be a global champion, a global leader, like the way that she has tried to be in her vice presidency. But also, she understands the way that she was utilized as vice president, and potentially the ways that she maybe wasn't utilized the best. And she doesn't want to recreate those mistakes. So I think that this whole process is happening in the front drop, and all things in the backdrop is how that she went through the process. But of course, they're trying to make this decision quickly, but they're trying to be thorough. And I talked to one person who said that the vice president is really taking this seriously and really trying to make this decision with all the weight that comes with having a vice president in the presidency, but also somebody that she's comfortable with and that she feels like she can be around for maybe even 8 years.
I mean, the running mate is in many ways the first presidential decision that an aspiring president, in fact, makes. We talked about the different coalition of voters. Another key group is undecided voters. You've got the former lieutenant governor of Georgia, Jeff Duncan, who joined CNN tonight to appeal to them. He was also at the Harris rally. Watch this.
I'm standing here as a Republican, but more importantly as an American, somebody who cares more about the future of this country than I do the future of Donald Trump. The Republican Party that Scott and I grew up in is gone. It's gone, and I don't like where it's gone. If you're a common sense Republican, you've lost.
Okay. All right. You hear the pitch? You hear the pitch? Jeff Duncan is a Republican. He is a real, as I like to say, a real Republican. How much do you think this decision is going to impact and sway folks in his party, particularly in Georgia?
Well, I think if you're the Harris campaign, you're hoping that it has a lot of sway, particularly as you know that somebody that maybe the Biden campaign, when it was still the Biden campaign, wanted to rely on, Nikki Haley, has put her hat in for Donald Trump. So they're hoping to gain any of the never Trumpers, hardcore Republicans that still don't like the president. But I think what maybe is even more important than these potentially long list of never Trumpers that may come over to Harris is who Harris is and how they present that to Republican voters, to independents, to those folks that we're seeing now in polls who say that they don't know the vice president, they don't know what she stands for, and they don't know what she would do in office. So, yes, they're going to be trying to court those Republicans who don't like Trump, but they're also going to be trying to put that message out there. And I think that that's part of what happened today, and I think that we're going to see that more from the vice president going down the line.
And Duncan actually was moving away from Biden, right, toward the end there. And so it's really interesting. You're watching him kind of go back to where he wanted to be, which is going to the Democratic nominee in this race.
And notably, he was a lieutenant governor of Georgia during that infamous "Find Me the Votes" phone call between Donald Trump and Brad Raffensperger. Latasha, can we talk about this Bloomberg poll that I mentioned at the top? This poll shows Vice President Harris wiping out Donald Trump's lead in 7 battleground states. Most of these do fall within the margin of error. Lots of my pollster friends have cautioned that folks should not get too excited about this, but we are looking at a dramatic reshaping of this race. I'm wondering what you make of these numbers.
You know, I'm one of those people that I think polls give you a temperature. They give you a temperature of the moment. And I think what we're seeing is the polls are showing that they're gaining ground, that the Democrats are actually gaining ground, and that there is a lot of opportunity and energy and momentum that can be captured. And this is before the DNC. This is before the convention. And so while I don't think it's an indicator of what's going to happen at the end, what I do think it's an indicator of the kind of energy and the momentum that's out there right now. We're hearing the same thing from the ground with the people that we work with in Georgia and Arizona and Michigan and Pennsylvania. We're hearing that there's a much more renewed energy, that young people and those who had disengaged are now engaged, that there are more people that are volunteering. There are people that are calling us, asking us for more things to do or information about the candidates. And so I do think that what is picking up is this renewed energy. And it's a matter of, can the campaign sustain this momentum and keep it moving? What I saw tonight in Atlanta, if we continue to see this kind of momentum of what happened in Atlanta tonight, not only will it turn Georgia, but I think those other states that are in play, I think that gap is absolutely going to be a gap that they can sustain.